There are some studies that show minimal success with these. There are some studies that show no success at all. Low-fat diets don't work, in my opinion, and I'm going to tell you why. Fat is a satiator. What does that mean? That means that fat actually stimulates the satiety center in your brain and tells you to stop eating. Protein does the same thing to a lesser extent. So if you're not eating fat, your brain isn't telling you to stop eating. The only way you stop eating then is by the time your stomach gets so distended with food that you simply have no room. At that point in time, you've eaten way too much. So in general, the low-fat diets are ineffective, and I don't recommend them. The Mediterranean diet is another diet that's come into favor over the last 10 years. Basically, this is a diet that's high in olive oil, high in avocados and good fats, which I think is excellent. It's low beef, which I'm not so wild about. There's not really a lot of data to suggest that Mediterranean diet works. It all comes from the fact that people in the Mediterranean have lower heart disease, and therefore, it must be that their diet is causing it. When you actually transport the Mediterranean diet into non-Mediterranean folks, you don't see that much benefit from it. Intermittent fasting is another way to lose weight. That's come about into popularity recently. Basically, the idea of intermittent fasting comes from the fact that as we have evolved from primordial man, into this, 3 meals a day kind of thing, we hearken back to, years ago when primordial man ate when they killed something or they gathered something. They didn't eat all the time, and so they fasted on an intermittent basis simply because they had no food. Intermittent fasting hasn't been around that long, but there is some preliminary data to indicate that intermittent fasting is actually going to be an effective way to lose weight. Again, it makes sense to me from a paleontological standpoint. This is what our ancestors did, and those folks did not have the obesity problem that we had. Vegetarian diets are another way to lose weight. It's interesting because I don't recommend them in general, because if you, I love vegetables. I recommend vegetables to people all the time. And if you were going to eat just vegetables, then I think it's a great diet. However, it's difficult to be filled up by just vegetables. And what oftentimes happens to people who are on vegetarian diets is they eat way too much starch. Starch is a complex carbohydrate, and in my opinion, it's akin to a poison to your body. We're going to talk about that more in a couple minutes. The last thing I've got down here is the very low-calorie diet. Very low-calorie diets consist of a diet of about 800 calories per day. Oftentimes, these are administered, through a protein shake or something like that. So people actually don't eat at all. They just have the shake, which gives them their sustenance for the day. Very low-calorie diets have to be monitored by a physician because they can cause some associated health problems that need to be watched. So, moving on to the next, to the bulk of this presentation, and that is about low-carbohydrate diets. Just wanted to give you a quick idea about carbohydrates. If you take a look at the chemical symbol of carbohydrates, it looks a lot like the chemical symbol of hydrocarbons, which are gasoline. I mention this to people all the time because I also think this is a very telling similarity. What I mean is, a hydrocarbon, like octane or propane, are fuels for your engines, and carbohydrates are fuels for your body. So, body fuel sounds like a great thing. The truth of the matter is, it can be a good thing if you're running a marathon or a triathlon, but most of us in our, sedate society that we live in simply don't need all the energy that we're putting into our body. So again, simple carbohydrates are sugars, complex carbohydrates are starches. The difference between a simple and complex carbohydrate is simply one bond, and that bond gets broken in the body. So I think we're all pretty familiar with the idea that all starches simply become sugars in your body. So we're basically talking about the same thing, and that is molecules of glucose. Why do low carbohydrates work? Low carbohydrate diets work? Well, simply reducing carbohydrates is the best way to reduce calories because we get most of our calories from carbohydrates. Now, primordial man didn't do this.